And we are live. So, if anybody is listening to us, can you please confirm if you can hear me and you can see me and Julia? I know there is a delay, so it's great.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Faiz. Nice to see you. Well, I am glad to be hosting another episode of What Lies Beneath Ask Me Anything. And today, my guest is the smiling Julia Pottinger, all the way from Jamaica.
Yeah.
Welcome to the show, Julia.
Thanks for having me.
So, how are you this morning?
I'm doing good. I'm doing fine. How are you doing?
I'm doing well as well. It's nice. I mean, we have been talking about you and to get you on the show for quite some time. And then, we finally managed to get you here. So, so I can't be any happier. Um, so we all have seen the kind of work that you do, the around test automation and stuff. So the first question for you is, how did you get started with testing?
So I started testing in 2015, which is about 6 years ago, as an intern at my current company, QualityWorks. So I was in my third year of university. I saw a poster to say if you want to do an internship, you can do it here. I applied and I interviewed with Stacy. She asked me some testing questions, and even though I didn't really know much about testing, I had a mind to be inquisitive and think about what could go wrong and that sort of thing. So I was successful in that interview, and I started working there as an intern and then eventually moved to full time. So that's how I really started doing testing. Before that, I was testing things because I was in a Bachelor of Science in Computing, but I wasn't really, apart from testing my code that I write for certain programs, it wasn't something that was at the forefront of my mind that this is an activity, this is a career path. It was just something you do, like to ensure that the parameters you enter are working, to ensure that your code doesn't break, you debug it, that sort of thing. But I really didn't put a name to it, like, oh, this is testing, this is a career, this is an entire future. So yeah.
Yeah, so it's quite similar to the way I started off, because I also started with being a content developer, then a developer, and then one fine day I was like testing, and I was like, "What is it? I know only how to test my code. The rest I don't know." So
Yeah.
yeah, great. So in the 6 years that you've been in the industry, have you seen the testing evolve or the testers evolve?
Yeah. I think right now we are all about AI and machine learning. So that has been a big evolution. 6 years ago, there wasn't that much talk about it. Also, test automation wasn't as big and as upfront as it is now, to even where people are like, you have to know test automation. You really don't, but it's a nice to have. There is value in exploratory testing and doing what we call manual testing, but knowing how to do test automation helps you with repetitive tests and large quantities of data. So I think in those aspects, testing has changed. Also, a lot more companies are more concerned about the quality of their products, and therefore there are a lot more testing roles available. In the beginning, well, I won't say the beginning because in 6 years ago, there wasn't as much, but we are becoming more recognized. It's being understood more, and people are acknowledging the role that testers play in a larger sense.
You made a wonderful statement, and I know that some people are going to raise their eyebrow at that when you said test automation is not necessary, so to speak, but
No,
it's
as in for everyone. Everyone doesn't have to be a test automation engineer. There is value in doing exploratory testing well, testing for releases well, testing for certain changes. And even when you're doing test automation, you have to do some form of exploratory testing and what we call manual testing first. So if it is that you don't know test automation, you can take your time and learn it. It's not something that you wake up and you are a test automation expert. So yeah.
So, what makes a good test automation engineer?
I think there are certain categories of things. For example, knowing certain techniques such as page objects or different strategies that you can use to make your code efficient. That's really good. Knowing locator strategies so that your code doesn't break every time there's a new release. Knowing how to also talk to managers, because you're going to have to advocate what is the return on investment that automation is bringing. What do I can I get a budget for this tool that I want to use, and then doing tool investigation to really find out, is this tool working as it should, is it doing what I expect it to. So those are just some of the things that I think a good test automation engineer can do. Also sharing knowledge, because once you reach to a place, you may have tried out different techniques, data driven testing, you may use different tools, low code, Selenium, Cypress, WebDriver, IO. Being able to help other persons is really important. So persons may come on your team, maybe they're transitioning from manual testing to test automation, or maybe they just haven't had that experience. Being able to share that and help them to guide and help to guide them is a really good sign as well.
Yes. There's a question on what you just said. You mentioned knowing locator strategy. Can you please elaborate what you mean by that?
So locator strategy is specifically for UI test. Also, if you're doing mobile automation, but mobile automation has a bit of a different locator strategy than doing browser automation. So locator strategy is how you find the different elements that you want to interact with on a web page or on a mobile phone. So there is CSS, which is using IDs, classes, etc. And for IDs, it's a hashtag and the ID. For a class, it's a dot and then the class name. XPath is a bit longer. You're going to have forward slash at ID equal and then the ID. Same thing for a class name. Selectors Hub has some really good things in terms of making it easier for you to use locator strategies. You can check out more about that. I also have videos on my YouTube channel that I talk about different locator strategies and walk you through how to use them. But those are locator strategies. In order for you to interact with an element during test automation, you need to find that and then send commands to interact with it.
Yeah. So, basically, there is the same question that I was going to ask you. Casey has already asked. So, as per you, what is the best strategy between CSS and XPath?
It depends on your preference and what you're trying to find. I use CSS because it's short, it's quick, it's easy. And for an ID, it's just hashtag ID. With XPath, it's going to be a longer thing. So I
Mhm.
mainly use CSS. I use XPath if I'm trying to find the text for something, because in CSS there is no command to find the particular text. For example, if I'm trying to find the test chat on a web page and I'm using the text only, then XPath would be best for that scenario. So that's a scenario where XPath would be better than CSS. But I find a lot of persons have difficulties remembering the long XPath commands. So therefore, they mainly stick to CSS like I do, because CSS is easy. I can just look at it and understand it. But if you have practice with XPath, then you can use it.
And you're right. Selectors Hub has made life a lot easier, especially for
Yeah,
people preferring to go
yeah,
the
and
XPath route.
yeah. And on the talk of locators, sometimes as a good S that you have to talk with your developers as well. If there are long locators that are going to constantly be changing, then you will want to talk to them and say, hey, I know that these locators aren't the best. Can you maybe adding some IDs? And that's going to help to make your test automation a whole lot easier.
Well, talking about that, there is a question from none other than Naveen Automation Labs. That brings a smile on Julia's face as well. What's your
Yeah.
preference, Cypress or WebDriver IO? Welcome, Naveen. Good to
Yeah.
see you
Hi,
here.
Naveen. Um, right now, I am using mostly WebDriver IO. I am looking to get into Cypress to fully understanding. So I cannot say I have a preference between Cypress or WebDriver IO right now because I have not used Cypress as much as I have used WebDriver IO. So I am at the moment I'm going to be biased and say WebDriver IO until I have used Cypress in not as much situations as I've used WebDriver IO, but I need to use it and get familiar with it and see how it handles different situations to make a really fair comparison to say I prefer. But I think both of them are really good. Cypress is really big on the market right now. A lot of people are talking about it. They're talking about the advantages. I personally have been using WebDriver IO for 5+ years, so I see where a lot of the situations that I've encountered in test automation, it has been able to handle it. So, yeah.
Well, great. And talking about, since Naveen is here, you are here. I mean, we're talking about people trying to share their knowledge, especially on a platform like YouTube, and we know what a great job that Naveen does.
Yeah.
We have a lot of other good YouTubers who are doing a great job, and I must mention that Julia herself is doing a tremendous job with her YouTube channel. I'll mention the link of her YouTube channel in the description of this video. Uh, so
Yeah.
Naveen also prefers
Yeah.
WebDriver at home. So that's good. Now, I before this, I had a very interesting question from Chris Grant, and he's asking you, Julia, how do you document manual tests, and what tools do you use for that?
Okay. So there are different ways. So if you're doing the path where you want to have them stored and repeated, you can consider those test cases or test scenarios. I like test rail. It's a really good tool for writing and creating test runs, etc. QualityWorks also has a tool that we're coming out with called Quality Watcher, where it helps you to auto-generate test cases as well. So it's using AI in that to create test cases from your user scenarios. So that's really good as well. And then if you're doing exploratory testing or if you want something visual, you can also use mind maps to document your test cases. So Brittany Stewart, she works for Quality Work. She introduced us to how mind maps can be useful in creating test cases and test scenarios. So that's a really good tool if you want to look into that as well.
Awesome. Here's another interesting question. So I'm happy to see people asking some very interesting question. And this comes in from Niger Test Crowd, very popular group in Nigeria. And they're asking, there is a large section of community that believes that testing has no future. What do you think? And from what have you seen in the industry so far? What is your
Um, I think I'm seeing the opposite. I think I'm seeing an uptick in testing really. Like I think one of the first questions was asked was what change have I seen 6 years in the industry? And I think one of those changes is that there's a bigger uptick in testing. Developers are doing a lot more testing now as well. There are a lot more tools to enable testing to be easier and faster. There is DevOps that is helping the quality of the product to improve through CI/CDs and automated testing. There's testing of AI, there's testing of data, there's data analytics. There's a wide range and spectrum of things that you can test and techniques that you can use to test. So, in my opinion, I don't think testing is really going anywhere because of the nature of humans. Right now, we have short attention spans, and if we go on an application and it's not working, we're leaving and we're finding the next application. So, in order for companies to keep up with that, they really need to be releasing quickly. That means they're going to need the quality of their product to be good. They're going to need automated tests, a good DevOps pipeline. So, I think testing is here to stay and it's going to continue to evolve. There's going to be AI involved to help to test the different things. We're going to need to think about the data that we're using to test and all of that. So, I see it continuing to grow.
So that was really a great response, because I've also seen a similar trend. Okay, while we are having these notions about testing disappearing and AI taking over the world, on the other side, I see more and more testing being required, because somebody has to test that AI to work, right?
Yeah.
AI, before it replaces testers, somebody has got to test it, and
Yeah, and I
so
don't think we're at the place where AI is going to replace testers right now. Maybe in the future, but at the moment, I don't think so.
nah.
I think a lot of it is still conversations that are happening, and then we're starting to put it into practice. But there are tools out there that uses AI to do what they do, but then in turn, the testers use the tool that are made by AI. So I think there needs to be a larger uptake for AI to completely take over.
Okay, Julia. So talking about a little more about test automation, how do you come up with a test automation strategy? So just to give you the context, okay, if I am starting a new project, okay, from scratch, and I know that there is going to be some components, a large section of tests which will be repeated, and I want to reduce my workload and make sure that I have good focus on testing and making sure that the application is, you know, a quality product that is right from the beginning. I start thinking about quality. So I know that test automation is going to play a very important part. Knowing this, how would you build your test strategy,
Yeah. So
your automation test strategy?
the first thing is to think about why you want it. So you say automation is going to play a role, but you need to think about what role. Is it that have a lot of regression tests that I want to get done? Is it that I want to be writing code in Sprint at the same time? Is it that I need to add my code to a CI pipeline? Do I already have existing code that needs to be updated? So think about why you want to add in test automation in the first place. Once you do that, then it's going to steer you towards this is why I want to add in automation. Therefore, it's going to require this amount of effort from me. Can I do it on my own, or do I need to then bring in additional persons to work alongside me? So you start thinking about who is going to be on the team, start getting manager buy in, start thinking about budget, and then also start thinking about the different tools. What tools do you know? What tools does the other persons know? Are the developers using any tools that you can use as well? Are there existing tools within the company that they're using, and what is the efficiency of those tools? Are they really doing what they should be doing? And in thinking about tools, you probably have to do some proof of concepts, maybe create a table and compare and contrast them and see which tool is going to work best for the different scenarios. You also have to think about what you want to automate. So there are a lot of things that you can automate based on the project. So what exactly are you going to start automating? You can't automate everything. Are there maybe 30 tests that you can start with and ensure that those are maintainable? So those are just some quick things that I would start thinking about. And of course, creating that proof of concept to identify the tool, because in test automation, the tool can sometimes make or break your project. If it's easy to use, if it's easy to maintain, if it's easy to get your tests fixed, it makes life really, really better in terms of test automation.
So I, in my experience, I have seen a lot of conversations around automation start with tools. But do you think that is the right approach? That we think of a tool first and then think, okay, so I have to fit in the other pieces of the puzzle.
No, I think the first thing is why you want to add automation, because that is going to impact the tool that you choose. If it is that I want to do mobile automation because I want to have a wide variety of test devices, then me going and picking WebDriver IO may work because it works with Appium. But if I had gone and chose Cypress, which at the moment does not work with native mobile applications, then I would have chosen the wrong tool. So you need to think about why you want automation in the first place before you do anything, because that's going to help impact everything else that you decide.
Absolutely. And especially when you're working with CI/CD pipeline, it becomes even more critical that you have your why
Yeah.
clear up front, because while you may have a robust CI/CD pipeline, if your why is weak, then the whole thing is going to break, and then instead of thinking of return on investment, you have to think of additional investment
Yeah.
in that
Yeah,
situation.
because some CI tools can cost in
Yes.
terms of storage, but not also that in terms of maintenance. Do you know CI/CD? Because
Yeah.
I may know a bit about it, but I only know it for maybe a particular tool. I've done it with GitLab before and Jenkins, but if I'm going to be using GitHub Actions or Travis CI, there are so many different CI tools. I will have to spend some time to learn. So include the time to learn to actually do things in the planning, because sometimes we're like, okay, I have this strategy, I want to automate this, and we sometimes underestimate that automation is a complete development project, which means you're going to take time to start off, it's going to take time to write the code, debug the code, get the code working properly. So ensure that you think about all of those things as well.
Yeah, you mentioned a very important thing, and I think in my experience, I have seen that as probably the most ignored part of automation is to include the time to learn.
Yeah.
You know, people talk about tools, people may talk about frameworks, and immediately start jumping the gun on the ROI, and people may even consider maintenance, to some extent, but
Yeah.
learning nobody talks about.
Yeah.
You don't. It's like, okay, it's there and it's assumed that people know it already, how it's
Yeah.
going to work. So that's a dangerous one. Now there is another question from one of the things that you spoke previously, and Casey's again on fire with his questions. So Casey is asking, you talked about in sprint automation. Do you think it is really possible? If possible, how are you achieving it in the 2 week sprint model?
Okay. It can be done. However, it requires really good communication and sync with your developer, the product owner, and you. So you're going to probably reduce the number of tickets that are going to be completed in the sprint, because test automation also needs to be completed in that. When developers are writing code, you can also be writing code. So if there is a discussion from the very beginning about the feature, what it's going to do, what the functionality is. So for example, it's a logging feature. We understand how logging works. You enter a correct username, a correct password, you click the login button. That means it's three fields that you need. So you can start writing functions before you even get the feature in front of you. So that's what you would have to start doing. You'd have to start being really proactive. You can also discuss with the developer the flow. What is the function flow? And therefore, each party has an understanding of what the function flow is going to be. And then you can also decide on what the locators are going to be. So if you and the developer decide that you're going to have a ID of username, an ID of password, an ID of submit button, you can have that already in your code, so that when the release or maybe the feature branch is ready, you can just run your code, see what breaks, and then make adjustments. But before it even comes over there, you already have some code that has been written, and you're going to just start making tweaks to it. So it really takes a good conversation and planning between everyone to ensure that you can start writing code before you even get the things.
So Casey says that even we do these things, but we are struggling with this buzzword in sprint automation.
Yeah.
Now, you spoke about knowing about the function flow. I want to ask you, while you talk to the developers about the function flow, do you
So
also consider the data flow as well as a
yeah,
part of your automation?
yeah. So function flow, data flow, how everything really works. So it's not just developers, also product owners, because they're going to have acceptance criteria, things that you're expecting it to do, which can in turn be a part of the criteria that you're checking in your test automation. Data as well. How is data going to be handled? Is it an API? Is it a UI test? That is going to also impact the type of test that you write.
So, how do you, again, as a part of in-sprint automation, just maybe taking a cue out of what Casey has been asking, how do you handle, or how do you manage the test data within the same sprint, or do you prepare it much before the sprint, or how do you go about it?
Um, that can be difficult sometimes, which is why I say you may have to reduce the amount of things that you're trying to do within the sprint. Also, if it's only you as a QA, then you may have to say, hey, I can't do manual regression and maintain the regression suite along with doing in sprint automation. For me, in terms of data, I normally have my data files separate that I pull into my test. So that helps me with managing my data. If something goes wrong, I'm just going to one place to adjust the data there.
Casey has a nice comment. When I am asked to do in sprint automation, I ask for the developers to be informed. Oh, they should definitely be involved.
Yeah, yeah, they're a critical part of that as well.
All right. So there was another interesting question that I saw from Casey, and Casey seems to have a lot of questions. Everyone talks about automation testing, AI tools, ML. For an organization, what do you think are the most important areas they want us to identify? And when they look at the first place from a tester,
Okay, so if I understand this correctly, you're trying to ask where do you start as a tester in an organization, considering that we're talking about automation, AI tools, machine learning? I think first we need to have a process. What is the process to release, and how does quality and where does quality fit into that process? And then we can start talking about what types of testing and what types of techniques are we going to apply to this process to ensure that the product is of a high quality. So do they have a release process? Do they have different environments for you to test on? Are there tickets, have proper acceptance criteria? Do you have time to do exploratory testing? I always say you start with manual testing first, because if I am doing automated testing and I don't understand the business logic, then I'm not going to do a great job of writing automated tests. You have to understand what you're testing, what the different logic for the system that you're testing is, before you can start writing automated tests for it. Because if you understand the logic, then it helps you to think of a lot of different scenarios that you can include for you to catch that. So I would say first, have a strategy of releasing quality project product, understand where quality fits in, then start with doing some exploratory testing, documenting those, write some manual test cases, and then you can evolve into doing automated tests. AI and machine learning can come in later on if it is that you want to use AI to maybe create some test cases or some scenarios for you, then you can add that. But start and learn incrementally.
thank you for that response. I'm looking at some of the comments. There are some interesting things. So Casey says, I am having experience with almost all of the FANG companies. None of them follow in sprint automation. Can you please tell what all these companies, uh, what all the companies following this? Okay, so which companies are following, maybe, or or what are these
Yes.
companies following? Okay, it can be interpreted in two ways.
Yeah.
So
Um, so I don't have specific companies to name. I think it has come up a lot in terms of questions of persons that don't name the companies that they work for asking for it. As a consultant, I sometimes go on different client projects and they want that done. That's sometimes a goal of theirs. It's not something that you have to do, it's not something that you don't have to do. Based on your strategy, you can decide whether or not it's feasible, whether or not it can be done. Do you have enough persons to do it? Is it going to benefit your project and what you're doing?
yeah, if you talk about in sprint automation, it is also depending on the maturity of your team, the maturity of the process that you have,
Yeah.
because that is a critical piece. And you know, most important factor is that you should have a management buy-in. The management should understand. Again, the why becomes very important. They should understand why you are doing it, and why are you asking the things that you're asking for, because there is a lot that you will be asking. For example, the time from developers.
Yeah.
Okay, so they will say, "Hey, are they supposed to help you, or are they supposed to work on the future, on the feature?" So their time becomes critical, and that's where management will come in and say, "Hey, as a tester, you focus on things that you need to do. You don't have to do certain things." And you're absolutely right about choosing, less number of tickets or less number of user stories or whatever in the sprint. Now, the moment you want to reduce that, you may get a sharp glare from from the product owner, or from the scrum master, or whoever, saying, "Hey, come on, we need to increase the velocity here, and you're talking about picking up less number of stories." But again, you can achieve greater velocity with less number of stories. So,
Mhm.
but okay, there was another thing. So Jay Patel, he's asking, recently I heard about AI in automation. What's that going to be? So basically, uh, if I interpret this question correctly, how do you think AI will change the face of test automation? What impact? Because we already are seeing some self healing, you know, uh,
Okay.
functionalities coming up. So what else?
Um, so with AI in terms of testing, I know that there are different tools such as Apply tools that they use AI in terms of visual regression. So it is able to compare the different elements to what you are expecting to what is actually there and find bugs using AI. In test automation, it can be used to generate locators so it can parse the DOM and create code related to the different functionalities that are there. They can use imaging technologies and techniques to navigate and verify that UI objects are present, similar to what AppleTools is doing with visual regression testing. You can use AI tests to generate screenshots where things are failing. You can also use AI to generate test scenarios for you. So that is really not my area of specialty, but based on what I am reading and based on what I'm seeing, that's some of the applications of AI that I am seeing out there.
Nice. Okay, so again, Casey has followed up. Okay, Do, does everyone think what we are doing is right and makes value? And I think this is in context with the in-sprint automation discussion we just had. So I'll move on to the next question, and this has been a point of controversy for the last few days, because somebody had put up big poster comparing an SDET to a tester, and there were sharp reactions. And so, what are your thoughts? Is it? I mean, is there a comparison? Is there a comparison possible?
Um, I didn't see that post actually. So I guess I am not in the know with that one. But in terms of an estate and a tester, Um, I think they're referring to an estate in terms of someone that does test automation and a tester
Yes.
as someone that doesn't do test
Yes.
automation. There's
Yes.
always going to be that comparison. It's something that people draw to try to bring down one or uplift the other, which I don't really agree with. I think each has their own specific contributions to the quality of a product. So as I mentioned before, manual testing is going to be here to stay, in my opinion, because in order to even do test automation, you have to do some form of manual testing. Some of the best techniques about the quality of a product I've learned are from persons that are just doing testing. They are doing exploratory testing, they are doing mind maps, they are using a lot of things to help you think about what could go wrong, different scenarios that you can use. And that type of thinking I have used in my test automation to create different scenarios to automate. So I think in order to even be a SDET, you have to be a good tester. In order to be a good tested, you have to be a good tester. And over time, if it's something that you're interested in, you can upskill yourself and learn about automation and become someone that write automated code.
Yeah, this post actually came up on LinkedIn a few days ago, and then somebody put that as a part of the test chat community, and people had a go at it, and then finally it was Naveen who put out a nice video saying why this is a poor comparison at the first place, and then actually point by point he burst all the myths that were in that article. So it was, I would say, an article full of misconceptions. A lot of assumptions, a lot of biases,
Mhm.
and and so
And
it.
also, being a tester doesn't mean that you can't code or you don't understand um, how to analyze code or analyze requirements and business logic. I just think it's just what they're doing right now and their personal choice. And there's always room to grow if they so choose.
Well, Casey has a question, but I'm not taking that because we are not talking about company specific here. I know all companies. So initially, if you look at the term as that, originally it was brought into the testing world by Microsoft, who originally coined the term as that, and they specifically meant developers who will be writing code to assist in testing, especially to build the regression suits and stuff. So that's how it started, and then other companies, as it is a norm in the industry, when you see a term come up and people say, "Oh, this looks fancy," so everybody tends to pick it up and
Yeah.
they interpret it in their own way. So a lot of companies took it in their own way, had their own interpretation, rolled it out, and then, of course, because of the multiple interpretations, there is a lot of confusion in the air. And so, it entirely depends on the context. It
Mhm.
entirely depends on what the company is expecting out of the engineer to do, and that's important. And again, understanding what the companies are expecting from those people becomes an important aspect. So it is to be treated on a case by case. Um, so question is for company who introduced SDET. Well, that is from Jay again. He's asking. Well, Jay, like I said, I mean, it was originally a Microsoft term, but then other companies have taken it up. So I want to move further away, and I want to talk about some aspects of non-functional testing with you, Julia.
Okay.
Now, we pay a lot of attention to the functional side, and we try and automate stuff into. But some of the, I wouldn't call it ignored, but some of the things that are slightly overlooked are the non-functional part of it, and in a lot of cases I have seen that the customers actually realize it when their end users start facing a problem. So especially, say for example, performance.
Mhm.
Okay, when things start slowing down and somebody complains and say, okay, maybe we should have done a performance check. Or
Yeah.
if there is a security breach that happens, then people think of security testing as an afterthought. So what is your thought on this, and how do you think we as testers can bring about a change here?
Yeah. So the quality of our products not just doesn't just include functional, it also includes
Yes.
non-functional. So I may just be putting out a lot of test automation videos, but when I'm doing my day-to-day testing, I'm always advocating for different types of testing and different testing at different levels. So performance testing, I think earlier in my career, I had started using JMeter for performance testing. I was on a project where they used JMeter in a way that I've never seen it before. So there are persons out there that are doing performance testing and that sort of thing. Also, penetration testers that check for vulnerabilities in the software. There are different aspects of testing. I think if you start to get interested in the space, then you'll see a lot more of that content on your feed. I think Your the feed and the things that you see day to day are based on your interests, what you have posted about. For example, Test Guild, there's always talks about performance testing on the Test Guild. There's always talks about security testing. So I think it is happening, and as testers, what we can do is advocate for those to also be included. So we can have someone that specializes in performance testing, someone that specializes in security testing, and then different other non-functional testing as well. For example, WebDriver IO, you can now use dev tools with WebDriver IO, and it allows us to access Google Lighthouse that gives us back performance metrics. So
Yes,
even if
yes.
you're doing your UI automation, you can be checking as well for some performance metrics like the speed of a page load, how long did it take after you interacted with an element. So there are different tools that you can integrate into your UI automation to get those performance metrics as a start.
And so that is awesome. Now, if I want to go a little deeper into the application, if I go into the API layer and even deeper into the say the app code layer or wherever, uh, how do I position myself to be able to strategize my testing so that I'm getting a much bigger picture, and not just focusing myself on the UI or having a limited view.
You have to learn about those first because when I first started, I didn't know a lot about API testing and database testing. It was actually my second or third project that we started doing database testing. I was like, okay, cool, we can do this. So you have to really expose yourself and ask those kinds of questions, see what is out there, see what is being done, and then see what you can take from that to apply to your company or what you want to learn. API testing for me is, I wouldn't say easier than UI testing, but it is a lot quicker for me to spin up some API tests. So if it is that you want to get into test automation and you're daunted by UI testing, you can take a look at API testing. It's really, you're making a call, you're getting back a response, and you're checking for those response. You don't need to worry about locators changing, different things being added. The only thing that can really change sometime is the parameters that you need to include. So API testing I find to be really enjoyable. Database testing, you have to know a little bit about SQL or different queries that you would want to make, and then make that comparison to what is expected and what you're getting back. But I find that you should be including all the different layers because I was on a project and they were building a robot. So they were building a robot to do some commands or some tasks that you want to do. And I was like, okay, so what am I going to be testing? I don't have the physical robot. I'm not a hardware tester, but the robot use a lot of APIs to carry out the different commands. And so that's where I started to get into API testing. So we can start thinking about every application. Are they using APIs? Are they using databases? Where are the breakpoints? Where is data being transformed? Where is data going to be broke? And then you can start thinking about performance. If I made a command to that robot and it took 10 seconds for it to do it, am I going to be annoyed? So that just expand your mind and learn as much as you can about different areas and select the areas that you want to investigate and go deeper in.
Awesome. And there is a very interesting question from Rakesh, and I couldn't stop asking it. Is there a thing such as non-functional testing? Because when we talk about performance and security or scalability or whatever, the LET testing, a lot of it depends on the functionality or the functional behavior of the application.
It's just
So
a grouping that we use.
not, yeah, not essentially a term, but it has, people have been addressing it as an NFR, as normally they would say, non-functional requirements. And you know because there was an opinion of a lot of people that some of these aspects don't need to be drilled down to from a functional perspective.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, you know, you can come to know about the performance of the application only by noticing how it is functioning. So
Yeah,
it
so
is
you have to actually use it to see,
use it
does it scale, does it
exactly.
break when I have a certain number of users and that sort of thing. Yeah, that's
So
true.
probably you are saying no to the question that Rakesh asked: Is there a thing as non-functional testing? No, there isn't.
Yeah, it's just a grouping, like how we have estates
Manual
and
and automation.
testers. Yeah, we assign labels to a lot of things.
Uh, so okay, I'm looking for some more questions here. How do you see issues? Like you mentioned about network, and when we talk about good automation and good automation test strategies, when we see network issues coming up or penetration issues coming up or things like that. So would you include that as a part of your overall test strategy? Would you have it as a separate element in your automation strategy? How would you go about it?
So there are levels, I would think. So you have a test plan and a test strategy, and then you break out a automation section. In that way, you can break out a performance section. You can break out a security section. I think those are groupings of testing, and even in automation, you can break that out between UI, API, database, and mobile. So you can decide how you want to really structure your automation strategy and your test strategy overall. I think you should include it. A lot of times we forget, as Bridget said, we forget to include those non-functional things in there. But you can break that out. I have been using mind maps recently to create test strategies, and I break out the performance aspects into their own sections, because those aren't my particular areas of strength. So therefore, I'm going to need to collaborate with someone on my team that knows more about performance testing and find out what it is they want us to include in there. What tools are we going to use? What techniques? What are we checking? Are we checking load? Are we checking runtime? That sort of thing.
Nice. Well, I want to deviate a little bit from all the testing and the technical talk for a few minutes before I throw it open to the
Okay.
audience for more questions. And I want to talk about Jamaica. Now, you come from Jamaica, and synonymous to Jamaica are some names
Yeah.
which are popular all over the world. Hussein Bolt, of course.
Hmm.
You and I were talking before the show, so maybe it's good for the audience also to know. So is he kind of the poster boy of Jamaica?
Yeah,
Like
he is right now. So we also have Chris Gale. You mentioned cricket.
Chris
So
Gale, yes, of
Chris
course.
Gale is a big one. We also have Elaine Thompson. She is the second fastest woman in the world. We also have Shelly Fraser. She is the third fastest as well. So we have a lot of sprint personalities because we're really big on sprinting and we really do well at the World Championships and the Olympics and that sort of thing. And then from before that, earlier, we have Bob Marley and those.
Oh,
Yeah.
of
We
course.
also have younger artists that are coming up now, like Coffee. I think she won a Grammy recently. So yeah.
So you are a huge fan of Bob Marley?
Um, I listen to his music because it's played everywhere here. Every hotel that you go to in Jamaica, Bob Marley is being played. So I mean, it's something that you hear all the time.
So who's your favorite then in that case?
Um, I like Protege and Chronix. They are two newer reggae artists that you can check out.
Awesome. So, of course, we hear a lot about Jamaica. We see a lot of Jamaica on TV, and of course, that is one of the destinations that is there.
Yeah.
Apart, so, of my bucket list, sort of, I want to visit the Caribbean and the various countries, in there to see. In the meantime, we have some questions coming up. Uh, so here's a question coming from Casey again, and Casey is asking. We spoke about grouping as a part of the test strategy.
Mhm.
So can we have some sort of a grouping like this, where we can have integration, system, network, database, regression, positive? I don't know what positive negative is, but maybe you're
I
trying to
think
say.
positive and negative has to do with, so if you have an acceptance criteria, the user should be able to log in. A positive would be that they enter a correct username, a correct password, and they're logging in. A negative would be the password is wrong, then they get an error. What happens after it fails?
So you think this is a good logical way to break down the test strategy?
Um, I think some of these are subgroupings. So as I mentioned, I would normally have a grouping for automation, and then that can be broken down into API, mobile, database, and then I can have performance testing. I can have security testing separately. So browser compatibility configurations, those are more sub groupings rather than a main grouping that I would use.
There is this interesting conversation. So again, going on the definition of non-functional testing. So Kshitiz says tests that are not understood by functional testers is called non-functional testing. Uh, yeah, Michael had put in a different. Michael Bolton had coined a different term for it. So I don't know if Rakesh has a better way of explaining it. But to keep it in the context of the discussion, I think what Julia mentioned is true, that it is just a grouping. I mean, and treat it as such. Don't fall into a trap and get into an unnecessary debate over this, because you'd rather invest your time testing
Yeah.
than debating about it. Right. So moving on. So we've spoken at length about automation test strategy and things like that. So what I want to understand from you, Julia,
Mhm.
when you start thinking about automation, or when you start thinking about testing as such, okay, and you need people, how do you pitch that in front of your management? How do you say to the management, or what do you say to the management as to why you need more people? Say, for example, if you need more test automation engineers, or say exploratory testers,
Mhm.
what should be my pitch to a
Yeah.
manager?
So two things would be in that pitch: what they're going to be doing and what the value that they're going to bring, because they're going to want to know that they're spending their money well, because you're going to have to pay that person to do work. So they're going to want to know that if I'm going to hire this person, what are they going to be doing? Is it going to take up all the time? Is it that you don't have the time to do it? What are you currently doing to make you not have the time? And then what value can I expect to get? So if you have those points and you execute it well, have conversations, you can create presentations and that sort of thing to really create graphs and make your point come across really well, then I think that should be a really good start to that, to getting more people on your team. Budget is also another big concern. So is it that the company doesn't have enough budget for this, or they don't think the value that you're going to get back is worth the cost? So you may have to convince them on that.
Right. A few minutes ago, you spoke about having different sections in your test strategies. So for example, UI, API, database, mobile, and so on and so forth. So here is sorry, not this one, the previous one, I guess. So Shiva is asking, you mean that we need to be ready with all these aspects of testing before we want to get on the testing journey, or can you take them as they come to you?
You can take them as they come, because I didn't start out knowing all of this information. I started out, as I said, I would have mentioned that you can learn about these things incrementally and apply them incrementally. What I started out doing was, I actually did ISTQB. This is a debate whether or not you need ISTQB to actually take the exam or not. I found it helpful because there were a lot of terminologies. I didn't know that there was something called non-functional testing. I didn't know there was ways that you can find data, and I forgot the terminology that they use to make, if you have an input, you are using negative, positive, etc. So ISCQB Foundation taught me that. No, you don't have to do the exam, but you can read the material. You can also read other books and other material that is out there to give you an introduction to testing. That is going to tell you that there are different types of testing and there are different levels of testing. I think that's a good foundation and place to start. Once you understand those different types and levels, you can decide which one you want to pursue. But I'm not saying that you have to have all of these performance security database API. I am saying that you need to at least be aware of them, even if you can't do them. Be aware that there are different types of testing. And if you can't do them, how can you advocate for your company to get other persons that are more skilled, have experience in that area? Because those areas need to be tested as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, there is a question coming in from Tara Shankar. He is saying, sometimes we forget application flow and its integration. What are some good ways to keep track of those flows so that I can effectively test the change in one part and its effect on the other part of the application?
What comes to mind is test scenarios. I'm not sure if that's a really good answer for that. So let's say if you are doing an action and you expect it to impact something, if I'm doing test automation, then I'll probably have a before step. So the thing that I am doing that is going to affect it would be in my before. And then in my test, actually, I'm going to have what I'm checking for. So if, for example, I am going to change the user password, I would have that in my before, and then in my actual test, I'm going to verify that I can now log in with that new password. So that is how I would organize that in terms of test automation. In terms of flow, you can maybe have use different user personas that you create that is going to take a certain path throughout the applications. You can use visual tools like mind maps to map out how this user enters the application and what data they're going to be entering, how that data changes, and what is the expected result at the end. So in my mind, I would use a terminology like user scenarios for that. But I think that's a good point about testing the flow and how everything integrates. Some projects that I've been on in terms of doing integration testing, we test features first. So if there's a payment feature, we test that and then we put that together in together with everything, and we also do system testing to see how everything comes together. So we want to test individual features to ensure that they work not just on unit but sometimes on the UI level as well, and then we put it together with everything else to see does it cause any breaking changes, and then we do regression testing on all of that to see if there's any adverse reaction to what was introduced.
Yeah, and you mentioned, while testing the flow, you said we could probably add a before and then test there and then look at what the actual test does.
Mhm.
And in order to make sure that the data is flowing in the right way or the control is flowing in the right way, would you also sometimes introduce an after the test?
Yeah, yeah,
What happens? So you have both the before and the after, and to make
yeah,
sure that through and through you are getting your data flow right, your control flow right.
yeah. I would.
Okay, awesome. Can you please tell what does a tester need to have system design knowledge?
It depends on your role and what you're doing. Initially, I would say no, but then there may be unique situations where you need to know how to design a system. That sounds more something that a architect would know. I may be
So
interpreting
if
this
you
question
if so
incorrectly.
okay, let's suppose you are progressing in your career as as an automation engineer. So
Mhm.
you start off as an automation engineer, okay, in the role of an SDET because SDET was there. I want to use SDET here. So you become SDET, SDET 1, SDET 2, SDET 3. principal engineer or staff engineer and things like that. And then you grow up the ladder and you are very close to becoming a system architect or a test architect.
Mhm.
Okay, so there you would, in my opinion, need to have some system design knowledge.
Yeah, I agree. This is
And
why I said it depends on like what where you are and what you're doing. Initially, to become a tester, I would say no, you don't need to have that. However, there's a lot of knowledge out there, and it can benefit you in some way.
so let me just turn this question a bit and say, okay, if I am a tester, what importance will I give to understanding the architecture of an application? Not specifically the design, but the architecture, so that I can build better tests.
Um, we just talked about data flow, so like you would need to understand something like that. Are they using databases? Are they Do they have different environments for the test? Um, is one environment slower than the other in terms of performance? So that sort of thing I would think would impact it. And then sometimes if it's built with different technologies, the technology that it's built with can impact the way we test. For example, a React application, I think we have now reached a point where we can find React and Vue locators, but I think some time ago there was probably, once these new types of development technologies came out, the way we found locators were impacted. So that from that point of view, I can see how understanding how the system is designed can help to test. So if you have no SQL databases, then you'd maybe change that. If the APIs are GraphQL versus REST APIs, then that can impact the way you write your API automation and you do your API tests.
Awesome. And so, as a follow up to the system design question, Casey is asking, but if I don't know how the system has been designed, how are we going to test the application?
Testing to me is like using an application. Users don't know how the system has been designed and they're able to use it. If you want to dig more, then you can learn how the system has been designed. But to do exploratory testing, to find locators, you don't you don't have to know how the system has been designed. You get something in front of you and you're checking for it. If you want to dive deeper and maybe can help you be more effective in how you're testing and the decisions that you're going to make, then sure, you can learn about how the system is designed. But once you have business logic, once you are able to get something in front of you, once you can think about the different scenarios, then you are able to test.
Well, I hope that answers your question, Casey. Um, okay, so when Kitish is asking, very interesting question, and this is even more important during these hard COVID times when people don't know when to start working, when to stop working. So, how work-life balance? What would be your key suggestions to strike that balance?
Boundaries. So I start working at a specific time and I end working at a specific time. I don't go over that rarely. Only time I may go over that if it's I'm in a meeting and it maybe go over, but I have cut off times. I also have a slot for lunch where I take my lunch at a particular hour in the day. I don't work on weekends and I spend that time doing things that I enjoy, like going to the beach. You have to have really strong boundaries and enforce those. So I use my calendar to help me enforce those. So if I know that I have maybe this talk, this AMA coming up, I'm going to put it in my calendar from early so that others don't overschedule on top of it. If I have an article that I need to write and I need some quiet time to do it, then I'm going to put in a 2 hour slot or so to do those. So I use my calendar a lot to really map out how my work day is going to be. At the start of every week, I identify what my calendar looks like for that week. I create a list of things that I want to get done, and then I adjust. Am I going to be able to get it done in that time or not? also have to advocate for yourself. So when before I came into management, I was on projects, and sometimes these projects, they would be unrealistic expectations. I had to start advocating and saying, I need someone to help me because I'm unable to do this, and I'm not going to spend working. I start working at 8 and I'm still there on up until 9 trying to get something done. It's going to affect you. It's going to affect the time that you spend doing what you like, doing fun activities, which is really important for your mental health. So advocate for yourself and create those boundaries.
That is such a brilliant response. And to that, I'll just add one more thing. Listen to a lot of Bob Marley. You'll get a lot of peace. You'll get a lot of peace, and you can enjoy your work-life balance a lot. Okay. Um, well, so I I think there is a follow-up again from Casey, and he's asking, for example, I'm building a car, and a mechanic needs to know where all the components been installed and how they communicate with each other. As an end user, if I am passionate, I will understand how it's been installed, or I will go to the mechanic. So he's, I think the space was not enough. So he's put it as, so would you say that the mechanic is actually a tester who's breaking inside? Or I mean, I would love to listen to your response, and then I have a response for this as well.
Repeat what your question. So she's asking, the saying that the mechanic is the tester. Oh, we're still talking about the importance of knowing how the system has been
System
designed.
design, yeah.
I don't know anything about cars, and I drive the car, and I trust that the persons that have produced the car know what they're doing and that they did their different tests. I'm not saying at all that you never need to know how the system has been developed. However, everyone has their strong areas and their strengths. I am not a database administrator. I am not a developer. I am not a architect in that manner. So therefore there's going to be limitations to what I know. If it is that you think it's important that you know the system before, then fine. But in my opinion, people use applications. We use Instagram, we use Twitter, we're using YouTube right now, and we don't know all the different things and the components, but we are using it. If YouTube stop working and you stop hearing me, you know that that's a bug, you know that something is wrong. So without even knowing what YouTube is built on, we are able to evaluate how well it's working. So yeah.
So yeah, I mean, just to summarize for Casey, yeah, it is not a must-have skill. Initial, at least in the initial stages of your career.
Mhm.
But as you go along, obviously you are interested in knowing more. You develop an interest. You study the architecture,
Yes.
understand the
And
design.
just by working with different developers, you are going to see the code, because if it is that, for example, your automation is in development code, you will get to see those code. If you're working together on a repository, you can take a look at PRs, because I do that from time to time. But initially, when I started out, I wasn't doing all of that, and that didn't really reduce me being able to test. Now I am able to look at code and understand what it's saying and what it's doing, but not everyone knows and understand code, and that doesn't reduce them or prevent them from being able to go into a system and test it.
That is
So
right.
I interrupted you.
No, no, no. I think that's a great response, and I would have also thought in the same direction. I don't think it's a must-have skill for testers. It's good to have, at least in the initial part of the career.
Mhm.
But maybe down the line, automatically you will learn things, and then it turns into not exactly a must-have, but again, uh, a top skill in your repertoire. Okay, I would say, if you are really inclined to be a technical tester all your life, and you desire or aspire to be a test architect, then of course it becomes an important factor in your career profile, and you would want to have that skill. Otherwise, you are, you know, doing a little too much. For,
And maybe we are misinterpreting what Casey means by system design. But as we have been saying, you're going to be inputting data, you're going to understand the functions, the business logic of a system. I'm not sure if you classify those things as system design. So I really want to understand what you consider a system design. But as Bridges and I have been saying, over time you can dig deeper into the application and understand the code, what makes it up. But the first time I became a tester, I didn't know what made up the system that I was testing. I am able to use the system, I'm able to enter different outputs, enter different inputs and expect different outputs, and that allowed me to be able to test. So I'm not sure if there's a different definition of system design that you have in mind that you can share with us.
well, so there is, yeah, pretty much the same thing that what we said. So Tara Shankar is also saying the same thing. Is a skill which will help you to know the inner details of the application. It's a useful add-on which you will eventually learn during the career. Yes, of course, because we investigate more, and even with respect to our car, you know, we may not know the internals of it, but over a period of time, as we are driving it, we sometimes open up the bonnet and look inside and see what's going on, try to troubleshoot it ourselves. So we come to know about it, right?
Yeah.
Eventually we will know.
And as Tara said that it reminds me of certain labels that we have: black box and white box testing. So when you first start out, most time you're doing black box testing, you don't understand. And black box testing is important because you don't know the workings of it. It doesn't cloud or bias the expectations that you have of the software. White box testing is where you know a bit more about how the system is designed, how the system is functioning, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and more so, I mean, if you really want to know the technical stack of the application, then there are multiple ways in which you can know about the technical stack of the application, and then you can proceed with it. But then, you know, yeah, you will learn it over a period of time, like we have been saying. Okay, moving on. So, Julia, what advice would you give to young budding testers or people who are wanting to join the testing industry?
Um, So a lot of persons have been moving and changing careers, and there are different avenues and ways that you can do that. I would say identify or create a roadmap for learning so that you can start learning about different things, and then you can start putting together a portfolio. So Angie Jones talks about the portfolio for
Yes.
test automation engineers and just testers in general. She also has an article about the different levels for
Yeah.
testers that you can check out. So there are different levels. You're going to be more than likely be a beginner if you're just starting. Understand that you are a beginner. So there are certain things that you may see other people doing and you're like, I can't do that yet. I need to do it now. You don't. There are levels to the different things that you're doing, and being in the role, you will eventually get to that level and you will eventually be able to do all of those things. So be patient with yourself. Create a roadmap for the different skills that you want to learn, the different outcomes that you want to have, and follow that.
Yes, absolutely. So Tara Shankar has another question. What are some of the areas to focus before you actually start testing?
So, one of the main areas I would say is ensuring that you understand the requirements and that the requirements are written properly. So, it can be in a document format, or if you're doing agile, it's going to be user stories. Ensure that you talk through with the product owner and the developer to ensure that what they have is what the intended expectation of the system is going to be. So, that's one of the very first thing that I do. I review requirements and I review what already exists out there. How is that requirement going to fit into what exists? Does it make sense? So if it is that we have an application and it's just payments, and then all of a sudden now we're inputting a gaming feature, does it make sense for the application? And can I see where the requirements can be improved? Is the requirements missing something? Well, that's also a part of testing, but not testing in the traditional sense. So testing the requirements is a testing process that you should be going through. So that's where I would start.
Here's something interesting. Have you ever stopped a release?
Many,
I
many,
would have expected that. So
because
what do you say? How do you go about conveying the bad news?
so it's because of how I test and I communicate, they would have some inkling that it's coming, because I am keeping them up to date on how many test cases I've gone through, the results of the features that I've been testing. So they have been knowing all along. It's not just going to be something that I'm like, oh, release can't go out, and they have no idea that it was coming. As a tester, I try to communicate beforehand and communicate when I test tickets. I'll leave comments on them, and so everyone will know whether or not it has been passed or failed. So that makes it easy for me to say, no, the release can't go off, because everyone is at the same place that I am at. They know the bugs that exist already in the software. They know that there was probably no time to do a full regression, that sort of thing. And we come to that decision a lot of times together to say the release can't go out because of this, and then you have the supporting facts to say why it can't go out.
Right. Here's another interesting question from Kshitij. He's asking, testing generating too much information or too little information. How do you suggest testers get the right balance?
So I think this has to do with like reporting. You have to create line items for what you want to report on. So some things that you may want to report on is your test data, how much is passing, how much is failing. Test coverage may be included in that, doesn't have to be, but I use test coverage to determine how much of an application I've actually tested during that sprint. So if I've only tested 10%, that means that there's 90% of the application that I haven't started to go into, and therefore that's going to help me decide whether or not we can go forward. I'm not sure how to explain how I decide. So I'm not sure if Brijesh can say how you suggest you get the right balance between too much or too little information.
So here's what my view of this is, that testing, of course, it's talking about testing generating information. Okay, so there is a lot of information that testing always generates. Now, as your smartness lies in actually being able to decide what is the one that you want to convey first and how you want to convey. It is your smartness as to how do you want to convey the bad news. Like you said, Julia. I mean, it should not be like thrown at their face, all of a sudden. If you can make it subtle, and if you can already send them signals that I've only tested 10%, 90% is remaining. We don't have enough time, so we may run into something which may require you to push the release. So be ready for it.
Yeah.
Okay, rather than on the nth day going and saying, you know what, I still have 25% of the tests remaining. So it's a no go from my side, because I think that there may be a critical bug there, because I have seen a defects cluster around that feature. So you know you have to convey your news properly, and that's where I think you need to strike that balance, whether what information you want to give, what information you want to withhold. And there are some occasions when you want to withhold some information because you want to verify it again before you convey it. Usually you wouldn't want to withhold any information. So as a tester, it's not a great practice to hold on to a piece of information which may be a make or break. And then exactly who's your audience, you should know that, right? So are you talking to the developer? Then how you talk to the developer, you can't talk the same way to
A
your
manager.
manager.
And the reports that you create will be different because a developer may want to see logs. A product person may not want to see those logs. They just want to see like graphs and that sort of thing.
Right. So, there is something that you mentioned in one of the previous responses, and I want to draw your attention to that again, where you said we are talking about being able to, as a tester, you know convey the information uh, in a manner in which I don't convey the sad news upfront. So when I'm preparing for that, what should be my approach, or what should be my tone when I'm conveying that, because that also makes a difference.
Yeah.
Right?
So you shouldn't have a tone of blaming someone like this is the reason why or this person caused us to not to be able to go the release. Use facts. So this happened on that time. This is the amount of tests that we are able to cover. This is the amount of bugs that we have outstanding. And the release is coming to an end. Do you think that we should so involve them in the decision making? That's generally my approach. I don't go out and say, oh, we didn't get the tickets over in time, so therefore, etc. You say that we are only able to test this amount by this date, and therefore I'm suggesting that we push back the release.
So essentially, what you are saying, Julia, is that you make a suggestion rather than telling them that no, this is a no go.
It can come down to being direct and saying no, it's a no go, but that is probably too late. I normally start having these conversations early. So a sprint is normally 2 weeks. By the time we are in the second week, we can see where things are going. Because if 1 week has passed and we haven't touched half of the tickets, then we know that we will probably won't complete the next half because that's how things normally work. 2 to 3 days out from us being going to release, I should have things that I am testing because if I only have 1 day to test, more than likely the release can't go out because I need more time. So, and these are also conversations that you can have in retrospectives. So, if it is that it's a new team and just starting out, maybe the first two releases won't go as planned. So, you can have retrospectives to say, this is how I think we should move forward. We should have a code cutoff point where after where 3 days before a release, there's no more new code coming in, and those are the only things that are going to go out in the release. So it doesn't always have to be, oh, we can't go to the release, but create things that is going to help the release process be smoother so that there's a lot less of, oh, the release can't go out because.
Nice. Okay, so you spoke about test coverage.
Mhm.
Now, what are your thoughts about 100% automation coverage?
That's difficult because one unless it's a project that's just in maintenance, it's always going to be changed, so therefore you're never really going to have 100% because it's constantly changing. New features are being added, new things are being added, and so I don't think it's something that we can
So,
necessarily push for.
so, so I'm going to put you on the spot here, Julia. How
Mhm.
do you convince your management that no such that this 100% automation thought
I've never
cannot be
actually been
done?
asked to do that.
So okay, so if you're let's
But
say
let's
I'm your
say I
manager and I
was.
insist on 100% automation, 100% automation coverage, how are you going to come and tell me that no, it's not possible?
Um, I would identify exactly what I said. The features of the application are always changing. Maintenance of an automation suite is also important. So, which one do you think is more important? Do you want me not to fix the failing test that will happen from time to time? Do you want me not to finish the new features that will be come out? You need to really pick one. I would of course have different presentations and different conversations to bring up that point of why it can't be done. But if it is that they want 100%, I would need to identify those tests that they consider to be the 100%. Maybe it is they have a suite of tests that they want all of those to be automated. In that case, yes, we can automate 100% of those. But if it is that you want all the magic and all thingamajig, then it's really not going to happen.
So perhaps that answers this question. So when you say that you can't have 100% automation, then why do you need a CI/CD pipeline? So basically, Casey, what I understand from Julia, and Julia, you can correct me if I'm wrong. So within the CI/CD pipeline, whatever tests you have planned, if you achieve 100% of those tests, then you say 100% you've achieved 100%. So that 100% cannot be you cannot pick a subset and say okay 100% of the entire set. 100% of that subset itself is what you're targeting. Is
So 100% coverage for the application itself is difficult because application features are constantly changing. There may be features that we change, tests that needs to be updated. So it will always change. However, if you have a set of tests that maybe you consider this to be your regression suite and you aren't adding any more new tests to it, then you can go through, create a timeline of how long it will take you to do that. And after you have automated all of those tests, then you can say I have automated 100% of those tests. But for an application that is constantly changing every day, new features are being added, even if you automate everything that you can think of, there may be scenarios that you miss, there may be different variables that you need to consider, and therefore 100% of that is going to be the goalpost is always going to be shifting.
Yeah. So the context is really, really important. Probably we have got 4 minutes. Probably we can take a couple more questions. Um, when do we say a tester is skilled?
When they are able to positively impact the quality of a product. I think that's a general enough answer because everyone will have their own opinion of skilled. Some persons may consider skill to be what you can do and the techniques and the tools that you can use. But the goal of a tester, I think, is to improve the quality of our application. So once you're doing that effectively, then I think you have some skill.
Awesome. And let me see if I can have another question. If not, then I will. I do have a question for you. The
Okay.
last one, probably of the day. I want to start my journey as a test automation engineer. Okay, I've been testing for, say, for example, 8 years. Now I haven't done any automation. What is your advice for me?
Okay. I would say first know a programming language. There are low code tools out there, but at the same time, I think you should know how to debug that. So I would suggest you start learning debugging techniques and a programming language. Then you can, because you already have the basis of being a tester, then you can start learning about locator strategies. If you're going to be doing UI automation, if you're doing API automation, then you need to understand different types of APIs, different API calls. And then you can look into tools. So different tools that you can use, Postman for API, different UI and mobile automation. But I would suggest you start understanding a programming language. A lot of persons are using Python because they say Python is a bit easier to understand in terms of a beginner to programming. Once you do that, then you can improve on your skill. And there are different communities that you can join. So this is a really good community where we have sessions like that. There's the Test Automation University where it has a roadmap of things that you can learn, locator strategies, different Selenium, Cypress, WebDriver, IO, different tools. So join communities and learn from those people.
Awesome. I think we have one more question for you. What books would you suggest every tester to read?
There is one by Lisa Crispin and Janet that I think the name of it is slipping right now. It has to do with agile.
Agile testing.
Yeah, agile testing. I think that's a good one that you
Yeah.
can.
So there are three parts of it: agile testing, more agile testing, and agile testing condensed.
Yeah.
So
You can probably pick up the condensed one because it should be really good. Apart from that, I don't have any books that are jumping out. I mainly read articles and watch videos and that sort of thing. But I think Bridges mentioned Naveen that does really good YouTube videos, so you can check out his channel. I mentioned Test Automation University; they have a lot of course. But in terms of books, I don't really have a lot. I'm not sure if Bridges has some that he can suggest.
yeah. So what I'm going to do is, for the interest of time, I'm going to include some of the books in the description of the video. I'm also going to include the link of Julia's YouTube channel in the link of in the description of this video.
Mhm.
Now, Julia, I want to thank you first for coming to the show. It was an enlightening discussion.
Thank
Uh,
you.
you have been doing great work in terms of sharing your knowledge. Okay, we've seen how wonderfully Naveen shows his work. There are a lot of other YouTubers also doing great work. Now, I find your channel particularly interesting is because not a lot of women testers are doing what you're doing in terms of putting content on YouTube and letting people learn from it. So you've kind of reignited the revolution. I saw some women testers take it up, but then they are a little slow. I know that there are some who are also doing it consistently. You
Yeah.
are also doing it consistently, so thank you for adding to that. Um, it's a pleasure reading your content. It's a pleasure watching your videos, your conference talks. And thank you so much for your time this morning out of your very busy schedule and making
Yeah.
yourself available for all of us.
Yeah. To your point, though, I think a lot of women are maybe in different mediums. So I know Beth has some YouTube videos that she's putting out. Angie has an entire Test Automation University that she's in charge
Yeah.
of. Lisa and Janet already write books. So there's always been women there. They just have different mediums and different levels of visibility. But if they are there and they have been there before me and they will continue to be there. But thank you for having me. It was a
No,
really
I,
good
I I just want to add
discussion.
to what you said. Yeah, talking about the other women that you mentioned. Okay, Lisa and Janet, they not only wrote these books, but they have their own group called Agile Testing Fellow. That has
Yeah.
a YouTube channel, and
Hmm.
I was probably the first or the second subscriber of that channel. That's how I know it. Okay, and I have been watching their content regularly. Uh, Angie, of course, she's the entire test automation universe.
Awesome.
So yeah. So, and Beth Marshall, of course, she's doing this wonderful series with Postman right now,
Yeah.
as you speak. So yeah, things are definitely changing. The landscape is definitely changing. And like I said, thank you so much, Julia. Wonderful to have you here today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, and thank you to the audience for some wonderful questions, especially to Casey. He kept us really, really engaged.
Yeah.
Uh,
All right.
thank you so much, everyone.
All right. Bye.
Bye.